Kevin's hands pressed against the cold metal of the police cruiser as handcuffs bit into his wrists, while a 6-year-old boy screamed, "He was helping me," through tears that no one seemed to hear. 23 years of spotless service, and it all came down to this moment, being treated like a criminal for doing what any decent human being would do. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Riverside Preparatory Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. Kevin Martinez adjusted his security badge and walked his usual perimeter check, his weathered boots creating a steady rhythm against the pristine concrete walkways. At 52, he'd been guarding these grounds longer than most of the current faculty had been teaching. He knew every corner, every hiding spot, every shortcut the kids thought they'd discovered. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of children's laughter from the playground. Kevin smiled slightly. After 2 decades of this job, those sounds still brought him peace. He'd never had children of his own, but these kids had become his extended family in a way. He knew their names, their quirks, their fears. He was the one they ran to when they scraped a knee, the one who found their lost toys, the one who made sure they got safely from the parking lot to their classrooms. That's why the small figure by the front gate immediately caught his attention. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, stood pressed against the iron bars, his small fingers wrapped around the metal as he peered through. He was well-dressed, crisp white shirt, navy blazer with the school crest, perfectly pressed khaki pants, but his face was streaked with tears and his dark hair was disheveled. Kevin's protective instincts kicked in immediately. In all his years here, he'd never seen a child alone at the gates like this, especially not this early in the morning. Most students were dropped off directly at the main entrance, not left to wander the perimeter. "Hey there, buddy," Kevin called out gently, approaching slowly so as not to startle the child. "You okay?" The boy turned, revealing bright brown eyes swimming with tears. He couldn't have been older than first grade, and Kevin's heart immediately went out to him. The kid looked lost and scared, clutching a small backpack to his chest like a shield. "I can't find my daddy," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. Kevin knelt down to the child's eye level, his knees protesting slightly against the pavement. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus," the boy sniffled. Marcus Rose. Kevin didn't recognize the name immediately, but that wasn't unusual. With over 800 students enrolled, he couldn't know every family, especially the newer ones. "Okay, Marcus, can you tell me what happened? How did you get separated from your daddy?" Marcus wiped his nose with the back of his hand, leaving a small streak across his cheek. "We were driving to school, and Daddy was talking on his phone. He sounded upset, and I got scared because he was using his angry voice. When we stopped at the red light, I unbuckled my seatbelt and ran out." Kevin's heart sank. A scared 6-year-old running into traffic, the thought made his stomach churn. "Oh, buddy, that must have been really scary for you. But you know running out of a car can be dangerous, right?" Marcus nodded solemnly. "I know, I just got scared. Daddy's been really stressed lately, and sometimes when adults are stressed, He trailed off, seeming older than his years. "Sometimes they what, Marcus?" "Sometimes they go away and don't come back, like my first mommy and daddy did." The words hit Kevin like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a scared kid. This was a child who'd already experienced abandonment, who was terrified it might happen again. Kevin's protective instincts shifted into overdrive. "Hey, look at me, Marcus," Kevin said firmly but gently. "I promise you we're going to find your daddy, okay? He's probably looking everywhere for you right now, worried sick. Daddies don't just disappear, especially not when they love their little boys as much as I can tell yours loves you." Marcus searched Kevin's face, looking for any sign of deception. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, because his shoulders relaxed slightly. "Really? Really? Now, do you remember your daddy's phone number? Or maybe you know where he works?" Before Marcus could answer, the sharp wail of a siren cut through the morning air. Kevin looked up to see a police cruiser pulling into the school's circular driveway, its red and blue lights flashing. His stomach dropped. Someone must have called the police when they saw Marcus by the gates. "It's okay," Kevin assured the boy quickly, noticing how Marcus had tensed up at the sight of the police car. "They're here to help us find your daddy." But as the officer stepped out of the cruiser, Kevin's optimism began to fade. Officer Bradley Jensen was well known in the community, and not for good reasons. Kevin had heard the stories: aggressive tactics, a tendency to assume the worst, and a particular bias that made Kevin's skin crawl. Jensen was a large man, over 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker. His buzz cut and stern expression gave him an intimidating presence that he seemed to cultivate deliberately. As he approached, his hand instinctively moved to rest on his service weapon. "Step away from the child!" Jensen barked, his voice carrying across the courtyard with unnecessary authority. Kevin slowly stood up, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Officer Jensen, I'm Kevin Martinez, head of security here at Riverside Prep. I found this little boy." I said, "Step away from the child, now." The commanding tone sent a chill down Kevin's spine. He could see the suspicion in Jensen's eyes, the way the officer was assessing the situation. A middle-aged Hispanic man with a frightened child, Kevin could practically read the assumptions forming in Jensen's mind. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding," Kevin began, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "This is Marcus Rose. He got separated from his father and—" "Hands on the vehicle, now." The words came like a physical blow. Kevin's mouth fell open in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Hands on the vehicle. You're under suspicion of child abduction." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Kevin could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel the eyes of gathering school staff and early arriving parents beginning to stare. "Officer Jensen, I work here. I've worked here for 23 years. I was helping this child find his—" "Hands on the vehicle!" The shout made Marcus burst into fresh tears. The little boy pressed himself against Kevin's legs, looking up at the officer with terror in his eyes. "He was helping me. He was being nice." But Jensen wasn't listening. In one swift motion, he grabbed Kevin's arm and spun him around, slamming him against the side of the police cruiser. The metal was cold against Kevin's cheek, and he could taste the bitterness of humiliation in his mouth. "You have the right to remain silent," Jensen began, roughly pulling Kevin's arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place, each sound a nail in the coffin of Kevin's dignity. Around them, a crowd was beginning to form. Students, teachers, parents, all watching as the man who had protected their children for over 2 decades was treated like a common criminal. "Please," Kevin said, his voice strained as Jensen pressed him harder against the car. "Just call the school office. They'll verify who I am. Check my ID. I have my security badge." "Save it for the judge," Jensen spat. "I've seen this before. Predators who work around kids earn their trust. You probably planned this whole thing." Kevin's vision blurred with rage and helplessness. The injustice of it was suffocating. Marcus was still crying, now being held back by Mrs. Henderson, the school secretary who had rushed out when she heard the commotion. "Kevin?" Mrs. Henderson called out, her voice filled with confusion and concern. "Officer, there must be some mistake. Kevin is our head of security. He's been with us for—" "Ma'am, please step back. This is an active investigation." Kevin closed his eyes, trying to block out the humiliation. 23 years of service, of caring for these children, of building trust in relationships, and it could all be destroyed in a matter of minutes because of one man's prejudice and assumptions. He thought about his wife, Maria, who would be devastated when she heard about this. He thought about his own reputation in the community, built slowly over decades of honest work. He thought about all the children he'd helped over the years, all the parents who trusted him with their most precious possessions. And he thought about Marcus, this scared little boy who had trusted him, who had found comfort in his presence, and who was now witnessing the destruction of that trust in the most brutal way possible. "Daddy!" The voice cut through Kevin's despair like a knife. He opened his eyes and turned his head as much as the officer's grip would allow. A black sedan had pulled up to the curb, and a tall, distinguished African-American man was stepping out of the driver's seat. Even from his position pressed against the police car, Kevin could see the man's expensive suit, his commanding presence, the way he carried himself with unmistakable authority. But it was the expression on his face that really caught Kevin's attention, pure, undiluted fury. "What the hell's going on here?" the man demanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people stop and listen. Marcus broke free from Mrs. Henderson's gentle hold and ran toward the man. "Daddy! The nice man was helping me, but the police officer is hurting him." The man, Marcus's father, scooped his son into his arms, his eyes never leaving the scene before him. As he approached, Kevin could see the family resemblance clearly. Marcus had his father's eyes, his determined jaw, his regal bearing even at such a young age. "Officer," the man said, his voice deadly calm, "I'm going to need you to explain to me why you have that man in handcuffs." Jensen looked up, clearly expecting to see another concerned parent he could easily dismiss. But something in the man's bearing, his tone, his unmistakable air of authority, gave him pause. "Sir, this man was found with your son. We received a call about a possible abduction." "A possible abduction." The man's voice rose slightly, though he maintained his composure. "You mean a possible case of a security guard doing his job by helping a lost child?" "Sir, I understand you're upset, but procedure—" "Procedure?" The man stepped closer, and Kevin could see Jensen actually take a step back. "Let me tell you about procedure, officer. My name is Jonathan Rose, Justice Jonathan Rose of the United States Supreme Court, and the man you have handcuffed against that car is the only person in this entire situation who showed any care or concern for my son's welfare." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin could practically hear Jensen's world crashing down around him. A Supreme Court justice. Not just any judge, but one of the 9 most powerful judicial figures in the country. "Your Honor, I didn't realize," Jensen stammered. "No, you didn't realize," Justice Rose said, his voice cutting like ice. "You didn't realize that you should investigate before you act. You didn't realize that you should listen to witnesses. You didn't realize that your prejudices and assumptions might be leading you to arrest an innocent man who was protecting a child." Kevin felt the pressure against his back ease as Jensen stepped away, uncertainty replacing his earlier aggression. "You didn't realize," Justice Rose continued, "that my son is adopted, that he sometimes runs away when he's scared because abandonment is his greatest fear. You didn't realize that this man, this security guard, found my terrified child and stayed with him, comforted him, tried to help him, all while you were driving up here ready to play out some twisted fantasy of heroism." Marcus was still in his father's arms, but he was looking at Kevin with concern. "Daddy, is Kevin in trouble because of me?" "No, son," Justice Rose said firmly, his eyes boring into Jensen. "Kevin is in trouble because some people make assumptions about others based on what they look like instead of what they do. But that's about to change," he addressed Jensen directly. "Officer, you have exactly 10 seconds to remove those handcuffs, or I will personally see to it that your career in law enforcement ends today." Jensen's hands shook as he fumbled for his keys. "Your Honor, I was just following protocol." "No, you weren't. You were following prejudice. There's a difference." The handcuffs came off, and Kevin rubbed his wrists, trying to restore circulation. The metal had left red marks on his skin, physical evidence of the humiliation he'd endured. Justice Rose approached Kevin directly. "Sir, I owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude, and a sincere apology for what you've just endured." Kevin shook his head, still processing what had just happened. "No apology necessary, Your Honor. I was just doing what anyone would do." "No," Justice Rose said firmly. "You were doing what someone with character and integrity would do. Unfortunately, that's rarer than it should be." He turned back to Jensen, who was standing awkwardly by his cruiser, clearly wishing he could disappear. "Officer Jensen, I want your badge number, your supervisor's name, and the incident report number for this arrest. My office will be in touch with your department." "Your Honor, please, You were just what? Doing your job. Your job is to serve and protect, not to humiliate and terrorize innocent citizens based on your personal biases." The crowd that had gathered was now openly staring, phones out, recording the interaction. Kevin realized that this moment, his moment of humiliation and vindication, was probably going to be all over social media within the hour. Justice Rose knelt down and set Marcus on the ground, then approached Kevin again. "Mr. Martinez." "Kevin Martinez." "Mr. Martinez, my son told me you promised him that daddies don't disappear, that they don't abandon their children. Do you know how significant that is for a child who spent the first 4 years of his life in foster care?" Kevin looked down at Marcus, who was now standing close to his father, but smiling shyly at Kevin. "I just told him the truth, sir. Any father who loves his child that much, and I could see that you do, wouldn't just disappear." "How could you see that?" Kevin smiled slightly. "The way he talked about you. Even when he was scared, even when he was worried about your stress, he never doubted that you loved him. That kind of confidence doesn't come from nowhere." Justice Rose extended his hand to Kevin. "Thank you. For caring for my son, for protecting him, and for showing him that there are still good people in the world." As they shook hands, Kevin noticed that the crowd was beginning to disperse, but several people were approaching. Teachers, parents, administrators. Word was spreading quickly about what had happened. Principal Davidson, a woman Kevin had worked with for over 15 years, pushed through the small crowd. "Kevin, I'm so sorry. When I called the police, I never intended—" "It's okay, Mrs. Davidson," Kevin said quietly. "You saw a child with an adult you didn't recognize. You were trying to protect Marcus." "But this never should have happened," she insisted. Officer Jensen completely overreacted. Justice Rose overheard the exchange. "Mrs. Davidson, is it? I assume you're the principal here?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'm mortified by this entire situation." "Don't be mortified by caring about child safety. Be mortified by the fact that one of your finest employees was just treated like a criminal for doing his job with compassion and integrity." He paused, looking around at the assembled group. In fact, I think this entire situation highlights something important. Mr. Martinez here represents everything that's right about public service: dedication, integrity, genuine care for others. He's been protecting your children for over 2 decades, and yet he was nearly destroyed by one person's prejudice and poor judgment. Kevin felt uncomfortable being the center of so much attention, but he could see where Justice Rose was going with this. "Your Honor, I appreciate your words, but I was just doing your job." "Yes, that's exactly right, and you do it better than most people in positions with far more authority and recognition." Justice Rose turned to address the broader group. "I want everyone here to understand something. What happened here today wasn't just about my son, or about Mr. Martinez, or even about Officer Jensen's poor judgment. It was about the assumptions we make, the prejudices we carry, and the way we value, or fail to value, the people who serve our communities every day." Mrs. Henderson, the school secretary, stepped forward. "Your Honor, Kevin is beloved here. The children adore him, the parents trust him completely. What happened today is not representative of how this community sees him." "I'm glad to hear that," Justice Rose replied, "but it is representative of how our society too often treats people who don't fit certain profiles, regardless of their character or contributions." Marcus tugged on his father's jacket. "Daddy, is Kevin okay now?" Justice Rose smiled down at his son. "Yes, Marcus, Kevin is okay, but more importantly, because of what Kevin did today, you're okay too." He looked back at Kevin. "Mr. Martinez, I know this has been a traumatic experience, and I want to make sure you're properly compensated for what you've endured. My office will be in touch about that. But I also want to ask you something." Kevin waited, curious about what the justice could possibly want from him. "I sit on several boards and committees that deal with child welfare and safety. We're always looking for people with real-world experience, people who understand what it means to protect and care for children on a daily basis. Would you be interested in consulting on some of these initiatives?" Kevin was speechless. A few hours ago, he'd been a simple security guard going about his daily routine. Now he was being offered opportunities by one of the most powerful men in the country. I don't know what to say, Your Honor. I don't have any formal education in child welfare or policy." "You have something better," Justice Rose replied. "You have 23 years of experience actually caring for children. You have the instincts that made you approach a scared little boy with kindness instead of suspicion. You have the character that kept you calm and professional even when you were being unjustly humiliated." He handed Kevin a business card. Think about it. The country needs more people like you in positions where they can make a real difference." As Justice Rose prepared to leave with Marcus, Officer Jensen approached hesitantly. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to both of you. I made assumptions, and I was wrong." Justice Rose studied him for a long moment. "Officer Jensen, I appreciate the apology, but apologies don't undo harm. My son witnessed an innocent man being brutalized for trying to help him. Mr. Martinez endured public humiliation for doing nothing more than his job with compassion. Your assumptions and actions have consequences." Jensen nodded miserably. "I understand, sir. I'll accept whatever disciplinary action—" "This isn't about disciplinary action," Justice Rose interrupted. "This is about fundamental reform. If you truly want to make amends, then use this experience to examine your own biases and work to ensure it never happens again. Not just to you, but in your entire department." A month later, Kevin Martinez stood in the state capitol building, being sworn in as the new coordinator of child safety services. Justice Rose had been true to his word. Within weeks of their encounter, Kevin had been contacted by multiple agencies interested in his expertise and perspective. The ceremony was small but meaningful. Maria stood proudly beside him, tears in her eyes as she watched her husband take an oath to protect children on a much larger scale than he ever had before. In the audience, Kevin spotted several familiar faces from Riverside Prep: Mrs. Davidson, Mrs. Henderson, even some of the students he had helped over the years. They'd all come to support him as he embarked on this new chapter. But the most meaningful presence was in the front row: Justice Rose and Marcus, both beaming with pride. Marcus had insisted on coming, telling his father that he wanted to see Kevin get his new important job. After the ceremony, as Kevin was surrounded by well-wishers and photographers, Marcus approached him shyly. "Mr. Kevin, are you still going to be able to help kids like me?" Kevin knelt down to Marcus's level, just as he had that day by the school gates. "Even more than before, buddy. That's what this new job is all about, making sure all kids have people looking out for them." Marcus smiled and gave Kevin a big hug. "I'm glad the mean police officer was wrong about you." Kevin hugged him back, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. "You know what, Marcus? Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best opportunities to help others." As the celebration continued around them, Kevin reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. A single moment of doing what he'd always done, caring for a child in need, had led to public humiliation, vindication, and ultimately, a chance to make a real difference on a scale he'd never imagined. Officer Jensen had been quietly transferred to a desk job pending a full investigation into his conduct. Several other complaints had surfaced once people felt safe coming forward, and the department was implementing new training protocols around bias and community policing. But for Kevin, the real victory wasn't in Jensen's downfall. It was in the opportunity to expand his mission of protecting children. In his new role, he would work with schools, law enforcement, social services, and community organizations to create better systems for keeping kids safe. It was work that would have been impossible without his decades of hands-on experience, his understanding of how children think and feel, and his instinct for recognizing when a child needed help. As Justice Rose had said that day outside the school, the country needed more people who understood what it meant to truly serve others. Kevin had spent 23 years proving that understanding through his actions, one child at a time. Now he would have the chance to prove it on a much larger stage, ensuring that other children like Marcus, scared, vulnerable, in need of a caring adult, would find the help they needed without the adults who wanted to help them being punished for their compassion. The little boy by the school gates had changed everything, just by being brave enough to trust a stranger who offered kindness. And that stranger had changed everything by being brave enough to offer that kindness, even when it put him at risk. Sometimes, justice comes from the most unexpected places, delivered by the most unlikely heroes. Sometimes it takes a scared child and a humble security guard to remind the world what real service looks like. And sometimes that's exactly what the world needs most.